the system of voting using pebbles, olive leaves, or the show of hands that decided every aspect of the city's government.
Democracy gave the Athenians a great advantage of unleashing talents, powers, opportunities that other cultures simply cannot match.
The Athenians keenly protected their democracy from any threat, foreign or domestic. Once a year, each citizen could scratch the name of an individual onto a shard of pottery, known as an ostraca, and place it into a pot in the assembly. The person whose name came up most would then be ostracized, banished from the city. This was the Athenians' method of protecting their government, expelling any person they felt might become too powerful. But Athenian democracy could turn on any citizen, even its greatest war hero. Themistocles now found himself under attack.
The threat was gone now. His raison d'etre has been taken away. This is something he can't understand. Themistocles reacts, perhaps in an uncharacteristically crude way. He reminded the Athenian voters of what they owed him. Voters don't want to be reminded in any period of what they owe to their politicians. They want to be told what their politicians can do for them.
The Athenian people turned on the aging politician. Calculated, cruel, but deeply democratic. They ostracized the man who had led them to their greatest victory.
Themistocles was ostracized, I believe, because he was simply regarded as having gotten too big for his boots.
Some of the ostraca with Themistocles' name still inscribed upon them have been found, hidden down an ancient well. Archaeologists believe that these had been pre-prepared by Themistocles' enemies, to be handed out to Athenian voters who couldn't write. Themistocles never recovered from this humiliation. He was to spend the rest of his years wandering from state to state, finally dying in exile in Persia, the country whose defeat had been his greatest triumph. The Athenians were now looking for a leader who might fulfill their newfound sense of imperial glory. They found a man who seemed the perfect reflection of this new ideal. A man who would change the face of Athens forever. A man named Pericles.
It's probably not a more important figure in the history of classical Greece than Pericles. He was the leader of Athens at the height of its power and of its artistic achievement. He was the figure associated appropriately with bringing Athenian democracy to its climax, to its height.
But Pericles was no obvious democrat like Themistocles, for he had been born into one of Athens' most elite families.
Nobody had bluer blood than Pericles. His father was a famous and successful general. His mother came from one of the most distinguished Athenian political families. Pericles was born with advantages and eminence that Themistocles lacked.
And perhaps because of his aristocratic origins, Pericles knew what the people of Athens now wanted: a city fit to rule an empire.
It seems clear that Pericles had in mind to create a city whose greatness would be admired by the people who lived there, by everybody else in the Greek world, well into the future.
Pericles announced a glorious new vision to the Athenian assembly.
All kinds of enterprises should be created which will provide inspiration for every art, find employment for every hand. We must devote ourselves to acquiring things that will be the source of everlasting fame.
Pericles turned his attention to the Acropolis, the sheer peak in the center of Athens, home of the city's patron goddess, Athena. "20 years earlier, the Persians had burnt down the temples that stood here. Ever since, the Athenians had left these ruins untouched, as a memorial to those killed in the war. But Pericles had other ideas. He proposed a massive reconstruction plan. At its center would be a new Parthenon, a temple to Athena, and it would be one of the most astonishing buildings of the ancient world.
This new construction program was of unprecedented magnitude and expense. The Parthenon, in particular, was extraordinarily expensive. It was filled with all sorts of architectural refinements.
Pericles planned to spend over 5,000 talents in the first year alone, a total budget of more than $1 billion in today's terms. His project would require 20,000 tons of marble. The Athenian quarries at Mount Pentelicus, just outside the city, resounded as hundreds of workmen traced out and carved great blocks of marble from the mountain. This temple would be decorated like none before. Sculptors and craftsmen were gathered from all over the Greek world. With them stood Pericles, for he treated the building of the Parthenon as his own personal project.
He selected architects, he selected the men who designed the plans. Pericles was directly involved in the planning process.
Some protested that he was decking out the city like a prostitute. But when the building was completed in only 15 years, his critics were silenced. The Parthenon was and still is the most glorious symbol of Athens' empire. Here was the spiritual heart of the city, the mark of her wealth, power, and artistic genius.
When you first came through the door, you'd have been just stunned. You'd have been confronted immediately by an enormous 40-foot-high statue of Athena in gold and ivory and studded with jewels. I think the impression of a statue of that size and with that kind of dressing must have been truly overwhelming.
Pericles had embellished his temple like no other. Though this astonishing statue has since been lost to history, other treasures from the Parthenon have survived for over 2,000 years.